Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel for another midweek mystery video. Today's case is one that is a little bit different, but it's still a fascinating story nonetheless. I'd maybe describe it as a mystery turned on its head. It is a mystery, but it seems that a whole town knows exactly what happened to Ken Mcelroy. A whole town knows who killed him, but nobody will say a thing because Ken Mcelroy was the town bully. Nobody liked him, and it seemed like the whole town was glad for his death. It's a town-wide conspiracy of silence that has lasted for 38 years. Up to 90 people may have witnessed Mcelroy die, but to this day, no one in Skidmore has been charged in connection with the murder of Ken Rex Mcelroy. It's often referred to as the town that got away with murder. But before we get into the video, I would like to thank Magellan TV for once again sponsoring us. Magellan TV is a documentary streaming site with hundreds of documentaries about a huge range of different topics. I watch a lot of documentaries, and now most of the documentaries I watch are on Magellan. It really is incredible to have a whole streaming service dedicated to just documentaries, just education. I cannot recommend Magellan TV enough. They have everything on there from true crime to science, to history, nature and everything in between, with new programmes being added weekly that can be watched anywhere on your TV, laptop and mobile. It's compatible with Roku, Amazon Fire TV, Google Play and iOS, and loads of the programmes are available in 4K. As always, I'm going to give you a couple of documentary recommendations I hope you will enjoy. The first one is Sex Revolutions. It's a very Georgia two-part series all about the evolution of sexual behaviour from the 1940s until now, and it focuses a lot on feminism and homosexuality, and honestly I just loved it. It was right up my street. And in the spirit of crime we have Last Confessions of the Cannibal. And I think that one is kind of self-explanatory. So let's begin by looking at Ken's background. He was born Kenneth Rex Mcelroy on June 1st, 1934. He was the 13th of 14 children born to Tony and Mabel Mcelroy. They were a poor migrant family who settled just outside of a town called Skidmore in Nodaway County, Missouri. Because of course a story like this just happens to take place in a place called Skidmore. By the time he was 13, Ken was already known to local authorities and he dropped out of school in the 8th grade. He was fairly uneducated, and being one of the youngest children in his family, his huge family, he was poor, he had a very strict upbringing, he would have most likely felt pretty inferior compared to his peers. He would have felt like he had no choice but to make his own way in life and to fight for his own way in life. He had no education, he could barely read and write, and it's easy for somebody with that kind of background to grow up and become a bully, a criminal. If you feel inferior, you push yourself to the top of the pyramid. And it seems like that's exactly what Ken did, at least at the expense of the rest of the citizens of Skidmore. Over the years, he never really had a legitimate career for any long amount of time, but he was always known to keep rolls of $100 bills in his pocket, most likely from rustling cattle and horses. He was a tall man. He was 6'3" and about 270 pounds. He had this jet black hair with these long sideburns, and he was described as having steel blue cold eyes just pierced straight through you. And he had a huge criminal record spanning more than 2 decades. Over 24 felony charges: cattle rustling, hog rustling, molesting a child, assault with intent to kill, burglary, theft and so on. Ken made most of his money through cattle though, pulling up to farms in the dead of the night and making off with whatever animals he could, and he'd go on to sell them at auction. People generally knew what he was doing, the farmers knew it was him, but everyone turned a blind eye because he was a scary guy. Each time a charge was brought against him, it would eventually get dropped after witnesses refused to testify due to Ken allegedly intimidating them, following them around the town or just parking up ominously outside their homes. He was what is often referred to as a career criminal. His career was just crime, and he would carry a gun with him at all times. And alongside being a criminal, he was just considered to be an all-round bully in the town, from when he was a kid and would steal lunch money from other students, right through to when he was an adult and would shoot people in the street for no reason. He relied on intimidation to keep him out of jail. But also he relied on his lawyer, a man called Richard McFadden. He was a very skilled defence attorney who would do whatever he could to keep Ken in the streets. Ken had the money to pay him, and therefore Richard would use all the tricks in the book. Say what you want, but Richard McFadden was clearly very good at what he did. He was a very, very good lawyer. And all this even worked when Ken's crimes grew to attempted murder. On the 27th of July in 1976, Skidmore farmer Romaine Henry was shot twice with a shotgun by Ken McElroy. Ken approaches Romaine Henry in the street and says that Romaine was a dirty son of a bitch who had been basically pulling up to Ken's house in a white Pontiac. Now Romaine denies this happening, but Ken pulls out a gun and pulls the trigger, shooting him twice in the stomach. Romaine goes to the hospital and is reported to the police, only for two different people to come forward to give Ken an alibi, saying that he was elsewhere at the time of the shooting. And so Ken gets away with it. But that wasn't his first major crime. A few years beforehand, in June 1973, Ken McElroy was indicted for arson, assault and statutory rape. He was released on $2,500 bail. He would have been around 39 years old at this point, and he was accused of the rape of a 16-year-old girl called Trina McLeod. Trina was just a child when she started seeing Ken. She was 14 years old. And 14 years old was his usual chosen age for girls. He would pick Trina up off the school bus after school and they would go off together before he would drop her back at the bus stop to head home. And it seems that Trina was really smitten with him, but Ken was already married. He was married 5 times in his life, and there are varying numbers of how many children he had. I've seen numbers saying they had from anywhere from 10 to 19 children. At the time he was seeing Trina, he was already married to his wife Alice, who he'd also started seeing when she was just 14 years old. Trina was apparently jealous over the fact that he wouldn't leave his wife for her, and her parents wouldn't let them get married. So when she's 16, she accuses him of statutory rape. They've already got a child together at this point. There were also rumours flying around that Ken had set fire to Trina's parents' house. This house just went up in flames one day and everything pointed to Ken being the reason why. But I think it was later written off as being a wiring fault, an electrical fault. Ken is arrested and charged with the rape, so him and Trina flee together to Kansas so they can get married there. This means that she can no longer testify against him in court, and so of course the charges get dropped. Trina, I think, is 16 when the two got married, and she moved into the family home with Alice, Ken's other wife. She lived with Alice in a kind of sister-wife situation, and all of their kids played very happily together. It was just a very unusual family setup. Of course, polygamy was illegal at the time. Ken couldn't legally have 2 wives, but Ken was never one for following the law anyway. But he was reportedly a really great dad. He was loving and caring towards his children, and he always sought to protect them. So say what you want about him, but he does seem to be a good dad, and no one seems to deny that, even the people who hated him the most. It just seems like he wasn't exactly the best husband though, and there are several reports that he abused his wives. But regardless, Trina acted as Ken's bodyguard of sorts. She was ride or die. Whenever Ken would start on someone, Trina would always be found nearby, gun in hand, always ready to protect Ken whenever she needed to. But it seems to be his children that would lead to his eventual downfall. It was a Friday when 2 girls entered the Skidmore grocery store owned by Lois and Ernest Bowenkamp. One of the girls was about 14, 15 years old, the other girl was about 4 years old. The younger girl picks up a number of sweets, according to Lois Bowenkamp, and attempts to steal them. Now, it all may have been a simple misunderstanding, a confusion, but these girls were, of course, the children of Ken McElroy. The girls go home upset that they've been accused of trying to shoplift these sweets. And so Trina McElroy appears at the store, upset that her kids were upset. There's a big disagreement. Trina's arguing with the cashier, she's arguing with Lois, and Trina turns around and says, "You're about to meet Ken Rex McElroy." When the Bowenkamps closed up store that night, Ken was waiting outside for them, but they just ignore him and head straight home. So Ken starts stalking the Bowenkamps. He drives past their house multiple times, parking up outside the store on many occasions. One time he even gets out of his car outside the house and fires a shotgun up into the tree, a kind of warning. But one day, Ken stops his car. He stops and approaches Bo, who's waiting at the back of the loading dock for his store. He's outside waiting for an air conditioner repairman to turn up. Ken just approaches him, points his shotgun at him, and shoots Bo in the neck, missing his head by inches. Beau is found just in time and he manages to gargle out the name Mcelroy, who was soon apprehended for attempted murder and kept in jail overnight before he was back free the very next day on bail, pending his trial. Now, it's a number of months until he's set to go to trial, and he continues his harassment of the Bowenkamps during this time. The family say that during this time they slept in shifts, keeping one eye on the street at all times. Ken would sit there for hours at a time just glaring at the house. Once the town marshal was called to help the situation, a man called Dave Dunbar, and Dave attempts to talk to Ken, but Ken just pulls a gun out on him. He begins threatening Dave and his family and asks Dave if he's going to be testifying at the Bowenkamp trial. Yes, he is, he says. He's the marshal and he was there the night everything happened. He has to testify. Ken replies, "Well, I believe in killing any son of a bitch that tries to put me in the pen for the rest of my life." As a result, Dave Dunbar quits his job. Even law enforcement was scared of Ken Mcelroy. A year after the shooting, he finally goes to trial where he is charged with first-degree assault with a deadly weapon, facing a 10-year minimum in prison. But this is already a step down from the attempted murder with which he was originally charged. Ken's found guilty of the assault, and that's the first time he's ever convicted for any crime. His attorney files an appeal and requests that Ken is released on bail. The judge agrees and Ken is allowed to go back to Skidmore. And as you can probably imagine, the locals were outraged. Ken was back at his local, the D&G Tavern, with his gun, this time a fixed bayonet, a pretty serious gun. He starts to make threats, loud enough for everyone to hear, about his next plans for Mr. Bowenkamp, to finish him off. Now, miraculously, Beau had managed to survive his wounds and he'd continued working at the grocery store. But Ken Mcelroy was also free to continue living his life, and people were back to being scared because even the law enforcement was scared. The law enforcement couldn't do anything to stop him. The people who had seen and heard Ken at the tavern with the gun decided to give the information over to a county prosecutor, requesting a bond revocation hearing. They basically want his bond, his bail, taken away. They want him put in prison before his trial. They all signed statements saying what they heard, and a hearing is organised to review the case. The townspeople all turn up to the hearing in a caravan, all together, a sign of solidarity. But Ken's lawyer managed to get the hearing postponed. This is a tipping point for the town, and the town meeting is called on July 10th. Everyone was to meet at the Legion Hall. People wanted to figure out how they were going to protect themselves because they had signed statements trying to get Ken back in jail. And they had no doubt that when Ken would eventually find out the names who had signed these statements, they knew he would try and kill them, or at least hurt them. Almost 100 people turned up to this meeting, pretty much every adult in Skidmore, with the exception of Ken and his family, of course. Even the sheriff was in attendance. Law enforcement was just as scared and had just as little power over him as everyone else. You've got to remember, this is a small town with small town law enforcement. At every turn, they were ousted by Ken's lawyers and attorneys and higher-ups in the system. They had to do what the system told them to do, and Ken was always one step ahead. Rumour has it that money exchanged hands at this meeting for the death of Ken Rex Mcelroy. No one outside the town really knows what happened in that meeting. But what we do know is that the sheriff leaves town shortly after the meeting finishes, and as he's driving out of town, Ken and Trina Mcelroy are driving in, heading to the D&G Tavern. After they were done, they head back out to their pickup and everyone in the tavern follows them out. Trina described it as the whole town stood there staring and laughing at them, surrounding the truck in a circle. He was 47 years old at this point. Now, Ken had been shot at several times and he was hit twice, once by a centerfire rifle and once by a .22 caliber rimfire rifle. Townspeople all give a different number as to how many shooters there were. No one bothered to call an ambulance. There were up to 50 potential witnesses of the shooting, all townspeople. Honestly, the numbers vary from 40 people up to 100 people, but 50 is what most sources tend to say. Every single witness, every single person there said that they failed to see who fired the shots. The story goes that the guns were disposed of immediately and every single shell was picked up from the scene, put in the back of a van and driven away immediately, like it was all pre-planned. That is like the urban legend within the town of Skidmore, but it does seem like police did find shell cases at the scene from 2 weapons. But rifles at the time were not registered. The police couldn't trace back these shell casings, these particular bullets, the particular guns that were used to anyone. Trina McElroy says that she saw who fired the gun that killed her husband. She said it was a man called Del Clement. But every single other person there who witnessed the shooting tells a different version of the story. Now, Del was the owner of the D&G Tavern, and he was a rancher who lived out west of town. He would have most likely been bothered by Ken because Ken coming to his tavern would most likely affect his business because people were scared of him and wouldn't come in if Ken was there. And also, Del was a rancher. He would have had animals, and the likelihood is that Ken probably stole cattle from him at some point, but that is just speculation. But what you've got is 46 witnesses who are all saying different things. They're all disputing each other. In the end, the DA declined to press charges. There was just insufficient evidence. They didn't have the murder weapon, they didn't have any reliable witnesses. You have an entire town of people who are willing to protect each other. Did they plan in that meeting exactly what they were going to do? Did they plan that they were going to kill Ken McElroy that day? Or did they just plan to intimidate him in that moment, give him a taste of his own medicine? Maybe a couple of people in that moment decided enough was enough and just decided to shoot. We don't really know. Trina fought to bring justice to her husband. She was entirely devoted to him in both life and death. She was sure she knew who the man was who pulled the trigger. She was sure it was Del Clement. At least that's what she said to everyone. But she would also say that Ken would never cause any harm to anyone, that he never caused any trouble in the town. She insists that he was a good man, whilst you've got the rest of the town saying otherwise. She would figuratively follow her husband wherever he went. And you've got to remember that Ken was all she'd known since she was 14 years old. You don't know how much of their relationship was true love and how much of it was grooming. But there's no denying that she did fight for her husband even after he was dead. After the murder, a task force was put together of both area and regional law enforcement, and they attempted to solve this case. They put together a list of witnesses and they came up empty-handed. Nobody was saying anything. The authorities expected to have witnesses and testimonies within a few days. They thought it was going to be an easy case to solve. After all, half the town was out there and saw what happened. But no one uttered a single word apart from Trina. And this really caught the media's attention. This tiny town in Missouri that had previously been completely unheard of suddenly had a national spotlight shone on it. I mean, it was a really interesting story. A small town, a vigilante group, and an unsolved murder of the town's bully. Suddenly, the country's media descended on this small town. I think it had a population of about 250 people. But there are reporters now at every single corner trying to solve the strange shooting of Ken McElroy. It was a murder mystery turned upside down. Everyone knew what happened, but the same as the police, the media couldn't get anyone to talk either. Trina told anyone who would listen that she knew what happened. She told the FBI, she told 3 separate juries, but there were still no charges brought on anyone. A lot of people in Skidmore actually think she was lying. A lot of people think that she didn't see Del Clement do it at all. But others believe her wholeheartedly. The McElroy family went into hiding after Ken's death, and they later reported that right after the incident, people would drive past their house at night and shoot into their home, attempting to shoot at the children. So they got out and ran away and went into hiding. In 1984, Trina filed a $6 million wrongful death lawsuit against the town of Skidmore, Nodaway County, the sheriff, the mayor, and Del Clement. It was settled out of court and she was awarded just $17,600. No one admitted any guilt or liability here. They just kind of paid her off to avoid the costly legal fees. No information was learned or revealed about the murder in this process. Trina eventually remarried and ended up dying of cancer in 2012, aged just 56. Del Clement died of cirrhosis of the liver in 2009, and he gave no deathbed confession. This is a really fascinating case to look at because on one hand you've got this man who's known as the town bully. One person even described him as a rural terrorist. He would terrorise the residents, he was a known criminal and even attempted murderer, and a paedophile. He's let out of prison time and time again, and on the last time he's reportedly overheard threatening to kill once again. So the town get together and they make a plan. They think it's better him than us. They take matters into their own hands when it seems like the authorities will not. And you've got to remember that the Skidmore sheriff was at this meeting. The authorities were there, but the sheriff just seems to mysteriously drive out of town immediately, just as Ken and Trina are driving in. But then, on the other hand, Ken McElroy is just a man. Is it right for the town to do this? Even if they deem it to be for their own protection, are they really above the law? Is anyone above murder? I mean, it's the literal definition of a vigilante killing. I googled it, and the literal definition is a member of a self-appointed group of citizens who undertake law enforcement in their community without legal authority. Typically because the legal agencies are thought to be inadequate. So, in all sense of the word, this is a vigilante killing. But then you've reportedly got people, maybe the same vigilantes, maybe not, going to the McElroy house after Ken's death and shooting at their children, something which happened on more than one occasion. Did the town have a right to do what they did? Was it a conspiracy, or did they just intend to intimidate him before one person took matters into their own hands? Did Trina really see what happened? Was it Del Clement? What would you do in this same situation? At what point do you feel like your safety would go beyond the law? I think it's a really interesting case to look into and talk about, because I think everyone would react differently in this case. I mean, personally, I think murder is always wrong. I can't think of really any scenario in which I would ever condone murder. But I haven't lived in a town where I'm being terrorised by somebody who's threatening to kill your neighbours, who sits outside your house all day, every day, and just stares. I haven't been in that situation, so I can't say really what I would do in that situation, and I doubt that many of you have been in that same situation either. I just think it's a really interesting case to think about and talk about, so please let me know what you think about this in the comments down below. And make sure you go check out Magellan TV if you want some new documentaries to watch, and thank you so much for watching this video. Bye guys.